In a city where prejudice runs deep, a black sheriff is pulled over, without reason, without warning. What starts as a routine stop turns hostile questioning, insults, threats. Then the unthinkable, a cop hiding drugs in the sheriff's car. A setup, a crime not his. Handcuffs seem inevitable, but then everything goes haywire, because every second, every word is being recorded, streamed live straight to headquarters. They think they have the power, but the world is watching. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The streets of Oak Ridge were quiet that evening, the sun casting long golden rays across rows of brick buildings and weathered storefronts as Officer Rick Slater guided his patrol car through the city's south side. He sat stiffly behind the wheel, knuckles taut on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched with a bitterness that had been growing since that morning's department briefing. The promotion had been made official. Isaiah Brooks, a black man with a reputation for clean leadership and community engagement, was now the captain of the Oak Ridge Police Department. Rick had nearly choked on his coffee when the announcement came through. "Can you believe this?" he muttered, his voice low but laced with venom. "They put one of them in charge, 30 years on this damned force, and this is what we get? This department's going to hell." In the passenger seat, Officer Ben Torres shifted uneasily. The young rookie had only been on the job for a few months, still adjusting to the rhythms of the street, still seeing the badge as a symbol of honor. His father, an old-school cop from East Oakland, had died in the line of duty when Ben was just 13. He'd grown up believing that wearing the uniform meant something. But riding with Rick Slater had begun to erode that belief. Slowly and painfully. Tonight, the older officer's words hit a nerve. "Maybe we should give Captain Brooks a chance," Ben offered cautiously, eyes on the road ahead. "He seems like he's trying to clean things up, bring some trust back." Rick let out a sharp scoff. "You're green, Torres. That's your problem. You think the world plays fair just because you do. Guys like Brooks, don't be fooled. They smile at the camera, but they hate what we stand for. Trust me. I've seen it all. You don't survive this long in the force by being naive." Ben said nothing, but his stomach twisted. The way Rick said, "guys like Brooks," told him everything he needed to know. It wasn't about leadership. It wasn't even about competence. It was about color. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the low hum of the engine filling the space between them. The city blurred past in streaks of amber and shadow. Oak Ridge wasn't perfect. It had its crime, its politics, its tension. But it was home, and it deserved better than this. Then Rick slowed the cruiser slightly, his eyes narrowing at the sight of a sleek black Audi gliding through the intersection ahead. The car moved smoothly, not a mile over the limit, turn signal blinking dutifully before merging into the left lane. The driver, a well-dressed black man, sat upright with purpose. There was no violation, no suspicious movement, nothing. But Rick didn't need a reason. "Well, well," he muttered. "What do we have here? Audi A6, custom rims, dark tint. Bet my pension he didn't pay for it the clean way." Ben frowned. "Sir, he hasn't done anything wrong." "That's what you think," Rick replied, flicking on the patrol lights with a cold smile. "Time for a routine check." The black Audi slowed and pulled over to the curb with smooth precision. Through the windshield, Ben could see the driver's shoulders rise slightly. Tense, expectant, bracing. "Sir, please," Ben said quietly. "This feels off." But Rick was already stepping out of the car. "You'll learn, kid," he called over his shoulder. "The real world doesn't care how it feels." Ben sat frozen for a second, then followed reluctantly, the knot in his gut tightening with each step. The air felt heavier now, charged with something he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. As they approached, the driver lowered his window slowly, revealing a composed face lined with quiet strength. His eyes flicked between the two officers, calm but wary. "Is there a problem, officers?" he asked, his voice steady. Rick leaned into the window, close enough to be intimidating, his tone coated in disdain. "License and registration." The man complied without hesitation, handing over the documents with a slight tremor in his fingers. Ben caught it, saw it. The fear, not of guilt, but of history. Rick squinted at the license. Isaiah Brooks, he read slowly, his lip curling slightly. And what brings you to this neighborhood, Mr. Brooks? Isaiah didn't flinch. I'm on my way to a meeting, he answered evenly. Is there a reason you pulled me over? Rick ignored the question. We ask the questions, he snapped. Step out of the vehicle. Isaiah paused, his eyes briefly locked with Ben's, as if searching for a trace of fairness. Ben looked away, ashamed. With measured restraint, Isaiah opened the door and stepped out. He moved with the calm precision of someone who knew exactly how quickly things could go wrong. Rick began circling the Audi, his eyes scanning every detail like a predator sizing up prey. Nice car you've got here, he sneered. How's a guy like you afford something like this? I work hard, Isaiah said simply, and I've done nothing wrong. Rick didn't respond. He ran a finger along the side panel, peered into the window, then rested a hand on his holster. Mind if we take a look inside? I do mind, Isaiah replied firmly. You don't have probable cause. I don't consent to a search. Rick's face twisted. So you do have something to hide. Ben felt his breath hitch. The tension was rising fast, too fast. Then, with a sudden motion, Rick yanked open the car door. Isaiah stepped forward instinctively, but Ben quickly moved between them. Sir, please stay back, he said, voice shaking. As Rick leaned into the car, rifling through the console and floorboards, Ben's heart pounded. Then he saw it, barely a flicker. A small plastic bag of white powder slipped from Rick's hand and tucked under the driver's seat. The world seemed to tilt. Well, Rick announced, straightening with the bag in hand. What do we have here? Isaiah stared in disbelief. That's not mine, you just planted that. Rick smirked. Looks like we've got ourselves a dealer. Ben couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His father's words echoed like a siren in his head. A good cop doesn't follow orders, he follows what's right. And suddenly, Ben knew this was no longer just a stop. This was the moment, the line in the sand, the split second where a man decides who he is. But he looked at Rick, then at Isaiah. And his next move would define everything that came after. Ben's throat tightened as he stared at the small plastic bag in Rick's gloved hand, the white powder catching the low light of the setting sun like a cruel joke. He had seen it. He knew what he'd seen, and yet for a moment the world around him seemed to pause, time stretching unbearably thin as his mind raced. Rick turned to face Isaiah with a smug grin, the kind that came not from justice but from control. You're under arrest, he declared, pulling out his handcuffs with a flick of the wrist that sounded too practiced, too rehearsed. Isaiah took a step back, his hands instinctively raised, eyes flicking between Rick and Ben, searching for reason in a place that had just been drained of it. This is absurd, Isaiah said, the composure in his voice now cracking under the weight of the accusation. That's not mine. You planted that, and you know it. Rick scoffed, ignoring him entirely, his attention fixed on cuffing Isaiah. Save it for the judge, Mr. Audi. Ben didn't move. His feet felt nailed to the pavement, every instinct screaming at him to do something, say something. But the years of training, the chain of command, and the sheer force of Rick's presence pressed down on him like gravity. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a moment of transformation or corruption. Then Isaiah spoke again, quieter this time, but with the force of someone who knew the stakes. Officer Torres, he said. Eyes steady now, his voice no longer pleading but commanding. You saw what just happened. Don't let this man bury the truth. Not again. Not this time. Rick turned, his face darkening. You shut your mouth, he snapped. You don't get to talk. But Ben had already taken a step forward, the pressure in his chest rising like a storm. Sir, this isn't right, he said, his voice tight but clear. Rick froze, cuffs still in his hand, eyes narrowing as he slowly turned toward his partner. What did you just say? Ben swallowed hard. You planted that evidence. I saw you drop the bag under the seat. The silence that followed was deafening. Isaiah stood still, watching the moment unfold like a man watching a fire being smothered before it consumed everything. Rick's expression twisted, disbelief and fury warring across his face. You little traitor, he growled. You're gonna side with him over your own partner? I'm siding with the truth, Ben replied, louder now, something new in his voice, a resolve he hadn't known he had. That man is innocent, and I'm not going to stand here and let you ruin his life. Rick took a step forward, towering over the younger officer. You don't know what you're doing, kid. I can end your career before it even begins. One word and you're gone. Ben didn't flinch. If that's the cost of doing what's right, then so be it. Isaiah slowly lowered his hands, watching with cautious hope as the tide shifted. Rick's breathing quickened, his face blotched with rage, but he was outnumbered now, not in bodies, but in conviction. Suddenly, Isaiah's eyes flicked toward the black Audi. My daughter, he said sharply. She's in the back seat. Ben turned. Through the tinted rear window, a small figure sat frozen, wide eyes staring at the chaos unfolding. The girl couldn't have been more than 9, her hands pressed against the glass, face pale with confusion and fear. Ben's chest clenched. He moved quickly to the car, opening the door gently. Hey, sweetheart, he said softly. You okay? The girl didn't answer, just nodded slowly. Isaiah stepped toward them, and for the first time since the stop began, the weight of what had just happened seemed to truly crash down on him. This wasn't just about false charges or corrupt cops. This was about a child seeing the system fail her father. Again. Rick, now pacing like a cornered animal, barked, This is all a setup. He provoked me. I was doing my job. Ben rounded on him. Your job is to protect and serve, not to frame people you don't like, not to abuse your badge. I won't be part of it. Isaiah raised a hand, not in protest, but in command. Enough, he said, his voice cutting clean through the tension. I've given you both enough time to do the right thing, and now I think it's time you know who I am. Rick laughed bitterly. Oh, this ought to be good. Isaiah reached slowly into his inner jacket, causing both officers to instinctively shift, but he moved with deliberate care, producing a leather wallet. He opened it, revealing a gleaming gold badge and official ID card. Captain Isaiah Brooks, newly appointed commander of the Oak Ridge Police Department. Rick's smirk evaporated. The blood drained from his face. That's not possible. Ben took the ID, eyes wide, verifying every detail before looking back at Rick. It's real, he said quietly. Isaiah stepped forward. I was on my way to headquarters to meet with the commissioner. Instead, I got stopped, profiled, and nearly framed by one of my own officers. Rick shook his head, stumbling back. I didn't know who you were. And would it have mattered? Isaiah asked, voice now laced with steel. Would you have treated me with basic respect if I were just another man? Or do you only show restraint when you think someone can end your career? Rick opened his mouth, but no words came. The weight of the moment finally began to crush him. Isaiah turned to Ben. You saw everything. You stood up when it counted. I hope you realize the courage that took. Ben nodded, his heart still pounding. I couldn't let it happen. Then we have work to do, Isaiah said, eyes narrowing as he looked beyond them, toward the flashing lights beginning to crest the far end of the street. Because this is bigger than just one traffic stop, and it's time the city sees it for what it is. As sirens grew louder and red and blue lights bathed the block, the pieces had begun to move. What started as a simple stop had become something far greater. A reckoning. Rick turned back with a bitter laugh, desperation in his eyes. You really think exposing me is going to change anything? They'll just find someone else to do exactly what I did. This machine, it keeps running. Isaiah stood silent, deep in thought, because something told him this wasn't over yet. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder, cutting through the thickening dusk like a blade. The quiet side street that had moments ago held only a patrol car, a black Audi, and 3 men now began to shift into something far more volatile. Lights flashed red and blue across the windshield of Isaiah's vehicle, dancing over the frightened face of his daughter still seated in the back. She hadn't spoken a word, but her wide eyes and trembling hands told a story louder than any siren. Isaiah reached for the rear door, his voice soft but firm. Lena, baby, it's okay. Stay right there, all right? Daddy's here. Nothing's going to happen to you. She nodded slowly, but Isaiah could see the fear hadn't gone away. It had only settled deeper, like a stain on her spirit. And that was what made his blood boil more than Rick Slater's betrayal, more than the planted evidence, more than being profiled like a common suspect in the city he had sworn to serve. His daughter had seen it all, and now she would carry it. Rick stood several feet away, pacing erratically, muttering under his breath. Every so often he glanced at the patrol car as if calculating some last-ditch escape plan. The man who had wielded his badge like a sword was now unraveling in plain view. Ben kept himself between Isaiah and Rick, his posture tense, one hand hovering near his belt, not on the weapon, but near enough to remind Rick that he was being watched. Then the first backup unit pulled into view, tires screeching slightly as the vehicle came to a stop. Two officers emerged, Sergeant Miriam Coyle and Officer James Pratt, both seasoned, both visibly confused at the unfolding scene. They looked from the open Audi door to Isaiah, then to Rick, whose face had gone an unnatural shade of red. "What the hell is going on here?" Coyle barked, her eyes locking on Ben. Ben stepped forward. "Sergeant, Officer Slater conducted an illegal stop and attempted to plant evidence in Captain Brooks' vehicle." Pratt's head jerked back. "Captain who?" Isaiah stepped into view, holding his badge aloft. "Captain Isaiah Brooks. I was en route to headquarters when I was stopped without cause. I have reason to believe Officer Slater knowingly and deliberately violated protocol and attempted to frame me." Rick barked out a bitter laugh. "This is insane. You're just going to take his word for it, over a cop who's put in 30 goddamn years?" Coyle's eyes narrowed. "We'll take the truth, Rick. That's all we want." "I have a camera in my car," Isaiah added, voice controlled but heavy with purpose. "The footage has already been uploaded to the department's internal server. You can see everything, the stop, the search, the bag." Rick froze, his shoulders stiffening. "You had a camera?" he whispered. Isaiah didn't answer. He didn't need to. The damage had already been done. Across the street, a small crowd had begun to form, neighbors drawn by the flashing lights, by the tension in the air, by the unmistakable sense that something big was happening. Phones were raised, recording, broadcasting live. Someone in the crowd murmured, "Is that the new captain?" Another voice shouted, "Why is he in cuffs?" But then someone else said louder, clearer, "Wait, he's not in cuffs, that other cop is." Rick's face contorted in panic. "You people don't know what you're talking about. This is all some kind of setup." But it was too late. The narrative had already begun to shift. The community, long simmering with resentment over unchecked authority, was watching this story unfold with growing awareness and fury. Ben took a breath. "Sergeant, I witnessed Officer Slater placing the evidence in the car himself. I'm willing to file a full statement and stand by it." Coyle gave a slow nod. "All right. Officer Slater, hand over your weapon and badge, right now." Rick didn't move, his jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake." "No," Coyle said coldly, stepping forward. "You did." As she reached for his firearm, Rick stepped back, his voice rising into a fever pitch. "This is what it's come to? A good cop gets taken down by politics and lies?" "No," Isaiah said, stepping forward now, every word steady and deliberate. "A bad cop finally faces consequences. That's what this is." Rick's hand twitched toward his sidearm, but Pratt was faster. In a smooth motion, he intercepted the gesture and pulled Rick's arms behind his back. "Don't," he warned. "Don't add another charge to the list." Handcuffs clicked into place with a finality that echoed in the silence that followed. As Rick was escorted to the patrol car, the crowd erupted not in celebration, but in something closer to release. Years of distrust, of fear, of pent-up outrage found its outlet in that moment. And as Isaiah stood beside Ben, watching Rick being placed in the back seat of the cruiser he had once commanded, the sound of cell phones buzzing, cameras rolling, and voices shouting filled the street. Then Isaiah turned to Coyle. "My daughter's in the back seat of my car. She saw everything. I need someone to escort her to headquarters safely." Coyle softened just slightly. We'll take care of her, sir. Isaiah nodded, then looked to Ben. You did the right thing. That won't be forgotten. Ben didn't answer right away. He was still processing the weight of it all. The choice he'd made, the partner he'd stood against, the truth he'd refused to ignore. I just did what I had to, he finally said, what my father would have wanted me to do. Isaiah placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Then he raised you right. As additional units arrived, news crews pushed through the edges of the crowd, demanding statements, filming every angle, trying to capture the chaos that had just crystallized into justice. Isaiah knew this was far from over. Rick's arrest was only the spark. The fire that would follow it needed to be guided, not feared. And as the flash of cameras painted his silhouette against the Oak Ridge night, Isaiah understood that his true test as captain had only just begun. As the crowd swelled and voices surged into chants of justice and accountability, the atmosphere on Maplewood Avenue shifted from confusion to purpose. Phones stayed raised, capturing every second, every angle, every word, turning this quiet residential street into the epicenter of something much larger than a single traffic stop. Isaiah stood tall, his badge now hanging visibly from his belt, the weight of command pressing down heavier than ever. His daughter Lena had been taken into the care of Officer Pratt, who knelt beside her with a gentle voice and a soft promise. We'll take you to headquarters, sweetheart. Your dad's going to be right behind you. She nodded, still quiet, but her small fingers gripped his hand as if anchoring herself to some thread of normalcy. Isaiah watched her go with a pain he didn't show, because showing it now would fracture the composure that had become his armor. A second wave of officers arrived, followed by a dark SUV bearing government plates that slid to a stop behind the last cruiser. The door opened, and out stepped Commissioner Elaine Grayson. Stern-faced, silver-haired, her presence always sharp as a scalpel. She scanned the scene with narrowed eyes, her voice slicing through the noise as she addressed the nearest officer. "Where is Captain Brooks?" Heads turned. Isaiah stepped forward. "Commissioner," he said, his voice calm but powerful, "right here." Grayson's gaze locked onto his, a flicker of disbelief in her expression. "Captain, you were supposed to be at HQ an hour ago." "I was," he replied, "but I was stopped, profiled, and nearly framed by one of our own." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every syllable landed like a gavel. Grayson's expression didn't flinch. "Is this substantiated?" Isaiah turned slightly, gesturing toward Ben. "Officer Torres witnessed everything. The vehicle's internal dashcam captured it. Footage was uploaded live to the department's cloud. Standard practice I implemented 2 weeks ago. You'll have no shortage of evidence." He paused. "We have a problem, Commissioner. A systemic one." Grayson folded her arms. "And you believe this incident represents that system?" Isaiah didn't hesitate. "I know it does. Rick Slater didn't act in isolation. He acted with impunity. The kind that only festers when no one's watching, or when those who do watch stay silent." Ben stepped forward. "Commissioner Grayson, I can confirm what Captain Brooks is saying. Officer Slater ignored protocol, lied about probable cause, and planted narcotics. I saw it. I've given my statement to Sergeant Coyle. I'll testify." Grayson studied him. There was a long pause, thick with consequence. "You're new to the force, Torres." "Yes, ma'am. I joined because I believed in the badge. I still do." Her eyes flicked back to Isaiah, then to the surrounding crowd, now swelling further into the street, spilling from sidewalks onto front yards. Reporters elbowed their way through, microphones raised, the word captain bouncing off rooftops and echoing into neighborhoods that had long felt forgotten. "Then let's be clear," Grayson said, raising her voice so that not just the officers but the people could hear. "There will be a full investigation, not a cover-up, not a closed-door inquiry, transparent, public. Effective immediately, Officer Slater is suspended without pay pending criminal charges, and if any officer here has knowledge of similar behavior, speak now or be complicit in its continuation." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then slowly another voice rang out. "I saw Slater plant a gun in a teenager's backpack last fall." It came from the back of the crowd. A woman in plain clothes stepped forward. "Officer Nadia Chen." Another followed, then another. The silence cracked, and from within the blue line itself came the tremble of reckoning. Isaiah watched it all unfold, standing still, not triumphant, but resolute. This wasn't vindication. It was confirmation of everything he had feared when he took this position, of everything he had been fighting for since day one. And now, the curtain had been pulled back. Commissioner Grayson nodded slowly. "Captain Brooks, you'll oversee this internal review, with full authority. I'll be in touch with the mayor's office. Effective immediately, this department is on notice." Reporters pushed closer, cameras zoomed, the questions fired like rapid gunshots. "Captain Brooks, were you afraid for your life? Did you know Slater personally? Do you believe this incident represents a wider issue in Oak Ridge PD?" Isaiah raised a hand. "I'll answer everything," he said, "but first, this is still an active scene. We have a protocol to follow. There is a young child who needs to be comforted. There are officers who need to be debriefed. And there is a department that must begin looking inward." He paused, letting the silence do the work. "We are not here to protect a reputation. We are here to protect people." Ben looked over at him, something shifting behind his eyes. Respect, gratitude, and something else. Purpose. He stepped beside Isaiah as they turned away from the cameras. "You really meant that, didn't you? About transparency?" Isaiah looked at him, the weight of leadership sitting heavily on his shoulders. "If I don't, then who will?" As they made their way back toward the line of patrol cars, the crowd parted like a tide, not in fear, but in something close to hope. Not full trust, not yet, but enough to see that a change had begun. One rooted not in silence, but in action, not in badges, but in choices. And as Isaiah helped his daughter from the back seat of the cruiser, wrapping his arm around her trembling shoulders, he knew this wasn't the end of a bad day. It was the beginning of a long, necessary battle. The real work was just beginning. 2 weeks after the events on Maplewood Avenue, the city of Oak Ridge was no longer the same. What began as a routine traffic stop had unraveled a deeply rooted culture of silence, abuse, and prejudice within the police department, one that could no longer hide behind procedure or politics. The footage from Isaiah's dashcam went viral, shared across news stations and social media platforms nationwide. But more than that, it sparked something Oak Ridge hadn't seen in years: mass participation from its citizens, demanding reform, transparency, and accountability, not just promises. The internal review, led by Captain Isaiah Brooks, unearthed a disturbing pattern of misconduct tied to Rick Slater. Over a dozen complaints had been filed against him over the last decade, most buried, dismissed, or quietly resolved. Several cases were reopened. Young men once branded as criminals were finally heard. Evidence once assumed legitimate was now tainted. 4 other officers were suspended pending further investigation. 2 chose to resign before charges could be brought forward. Rick Slater, stripped of his badge and dignity, was formally indicted on multiple charges: falsifying evidence, abuse of power, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. During his arraignment, he offered no apology, only silence. But the courtroom did not need his confession. The truth was loud enough. Isaiah, now recognized as a local symbol of justice, not just for what he did, but how he did it, continued his mission without fanfare. Under his leadership, Oak Ridge PD implemented sweeping changes: mandatory body cameras, civilian review boards with real power, community-based patrol initiatives, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Officers were required to complete intensive anti-bias training, not as a checkbox but as a condition for continued service. For the first time in years, citizen trust ratings in the department began to rise. Officer Ben Torres became a vocal advocate for reform within the ranks. His testimony inspired other rookies, and even veterans, to reflect on their roles. Some realized their silence had made them complicit. Others found the courage to speak up. Ben's father, who had once died believing in a badge that stood for justice, would have been proud of the legacy his son was helping to build. And Lena, Isaiah's daughter, no longer asked why her father always came home tired. Now she understood. Her drawing of her father standing between two officers, a shield in one hand and her hand in the other, hung in Isaiah's office, a daily reminder of why the fight mattered. Oak Ridge didn't become perfect overnight. No city does. But the stain of what happened didn't fade. It became a marker, a lesson, a promise. Because justice, when confronted with truth and courage, doesn't disappear. It begins, again and again. And in Oak Ridge, thanks to one stop, one voice, and one choice to stand up, justice had finally found its voice.